Pakistan, and Indonesia. So Asian division actually has the largest Asian collection outside of Asia, with more than 2.3 million items in our collection. So the material in vernacular languages about Islamic studies from South Asian and Southeast Asia, East Asia, is housed in Asian division. If you are interested in our collection, you can subscribe to our blogs and also Facebook page. Asian Reading Room open from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. from Monday to Friday. Now I turn over to Nuzat Khatun. She is our specialist in South Asian, to briefly introduce today's topic.
Hello. Today's event is an attempt to promote a better understanding of Islam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his life, his work, as well as it has to be promoted between Muslim as well as non-Muslim. Though the Muslims seems to have better knowledge, but not all of them. So it is better to make people aware of the value of Islam. Today the United States Supreme Court honors Prophet Muhammad as one of the greatest administrative justice in history. When the historian Michael Hart picked Prophet Muhammad as the most influential person in the history, he explained, "My choice of Muhammad to lead the list of the world's most influential person may surprise some and be questioned by others. But he was the only man in history who was supremely successful on both the religious and secular level. He was the most trustworthy person. People called him Amin. Amin means trustworthy, and people used to deposit their treasures in his hands. He was a champion of Civil Rights Act. He was married at the age of 25. His wife Khadija was 40 years old. But he believed in women's rights, and he consulted his wife for all his difficult problems as he was teaching prophethood, and he was spreading the message of Islam among the people. He placed a great emphasis on education. Though Prophet Muhammad was not literal himself, he was illiterate, and when Prophet Jibreel came to him and asked him to recite Iqra, Bismillah Rabbil Kalazi Khalaq, he said he does not know how to read and write. He said, "Recite in the name of thy Lord, who taught by the pen, taught man what he knew not." So after that, he got this divine knowledge of reading and writing. He was an advocate of education, and he spread this message of education among women, and he gave women equal rights, that they have to marry according to their consent, not selected by their parents and everything, but though it is not true even till present age. And then he also believed that women have the rights of inheritance and own the property. He was against racialism, like discrimination against the people, like you are white, you are black, you are from this country, you are that country. He believed in equal rights among all the people. So anyway, I will end this. Where is Aisha gone? Because Aisha is the next person to speak. Just end with a quote. Do what is beautiful. Allah loves those who do what is beautiful. It is from Surah Baqarah. Now I will present you Aisha Rahman. I know Aisha from her hometown, Knoxville, Tennessee, through some mutual friends. But I knew better when we started having this annual presentation of our Islamic collections. In the library, the Islamic collection, even in South Asia, is so tremendous that everywhere we pick up a different topic, but even then, so far we have not covered all. So there is plenty to go around. She was the executive director of KARAMAH and served as the head of the organization's family law division. Aisha received her higher education at Emory University and the University of Tennessee College of Law, where she was a staff editor of the Tennessee Journal of Law and Policy and headed the Muslim Law Student Association. Aisha is an advocate of civil rights. She has helped tremendously many women in solving their domestic violation problems and other problems attached to the civil rights and the society. In her today's talk, focus is still civil rights, but the angle is different. Her address is Prophet Muhammad and the pledge to civil rights. Aisha Rahman.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you all for being here today, and I also apologize for the delay. I think there was some rain delay, and I think this room was a little difficult to find, so I really appreciate your patience. On behalf of KARAMAH, I want to thank all of you for being here this afternoon for this very important conversation. I would like to thank Mrs. Nizat Khatun and the Library of Congress, Asian Division, for hosting us today. Today, KARAMAH has convened this panel of our leadership and our allies to discuss our collective obligation to stand for justice. KARAMAH is an organization with a deep history of advocating for justice and the rule of law. In our nearly 25-year history, KARAMAH has centered its work on providing quality research, particularly of Islamic law, and making that research accessible to the broader community through educational programs like these. Particularly, our work has focused on expanding gender equity and addressing the patriarchy that has been far too prevalent in our society. We couple this education with advocacy that promotes our core value, that dignity is God-given. While our nation has made immense progress, we have many battles yet to fight to end clear forms of systemic oppression that still persist today. Whether it is a lack of gender justice, racial justice, or religious freedom. Our history is riddled with instances of people and systems attempting to take away our dignity. At KARAMAH, we believe with knowledge comes action. We must protect the dignity that God has given us. And today, we are here to discuss with our partners about how we act to do just that. We have titled today's event, The Original Justice League. I'd like to tell you all a story of how we arrived at this concept. Islamic history records a famous covenant known as the Covenant of Fudul. In Arabic, it is referred to as Hilf al-Fudul. The story goes like this. The time immediately preceding the revelation of Islam was known as a time of ignorance. Among the hallmarks of this time of ignorance was the mistreatment of women, the mistreatment of the poor, minorities, and a general lack of justice in the society. What prompted the need for a pact was a business dealing between two merchants. After the exchange of goods, the seller asked to be paid the price that the two had previously agreed upon. The buyer reneged on the agreement and refused to pay. And instead of letting the issue go, the seller convened the leadership of that community and asked for justice to be served. The leadership came together, and out of that meeting came this pact. according to the covenant, all signatories would be committed to standing up for justice in a variety of areas, whether it was in matters of business or in matters of social justice. We are now calling this group the Original Justice League. This league agreed to safeguard the rights of the oppressed. Amongst those who signed the pact, of course, was our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. When Islam was revealed to the Prophet, we know that he reaffirmed this pact because it was consistent with the new worldview that was revealed in the Quran. Namely, the Quran established that all matters center around justice. Justice is the cornerstone of Islam. God commands us in the Quran, quote, "O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to God, even against yourselves or your parents or your kin, and whether it be against rich or poor, for God can best protect both. Follow not the lusts of your heart, lest you swerve. And if you distort justice or decline to do justice, verily God is acquainted with all that you do." This command is unequivocal. Standing up for justice is a moral obligation. And in fact, we know that there were many instances in Prophet Muhammad's prophethood where he fought to ensure that justice was served. For example, we know that he consulted regularly with a woman named Shifa. Shifa was a guardian of the marketplace. She evaluated the cost of goods to make sure that they were fairly priced and to make sure that there was no corruption and no fraud taking place. This example, among countless others, underscores not only that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, safeguarded justice, but that he did not discriminate amongst the people who were guardians of justice. In accordance with the legacy of the Prophet, we have convened today's panel to explore how this pact can be exercised today. With an incredible recent spike of incidents of hate around our country, now more than ever, we need to come together as allies and partners to address the misogyny, racism, anti-Muslim sentiment, and all other forms of bigotry and prejudice that are leading to not only the marginalization of our communities, but that are threatening the very life of our communities. With us today, we have three esteemed panelists who will address this issue. Mr. Hilary Shelton, the Director of the Washington Bureau of the NAACP, Ms. Raheemah Abudlaleem from the Associate General Counsel at the Executive Office of the President and also the President of KARAMAH, and Representative Andre Carson, Congressman from the great state of Indiana. Each panelist will give their introductory remarks, and then we will be passing out some note cards for you all to ask questions, and we will then have a discussion after the introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you so much also for your kind words to begin. So the Original Justice League, an obligation to serve humanity. When I heard that topic, I said, Aisha, Qasim, good job. That's a great title. Now, what are we going to talk about with respect to that title? Well, unfortunately, I started reading the newspaper this morning. Many years ago, a mentor told me, before you speak, always read the paper to see what's going on in the world. So I read an article this morning. It recounts an event from this past weekend. You know, Saturday, December 3rd, 2016, there was a parent who was doing what parents all across this country do on Saturday nights. And if you have teenagers, you know what that is. You chauffeur your teenagers from event to event. But this wasn't a typical Saturday night for this parent. Because on this Saturday night, the parent was Amal El-Fakari, who dropped off her son, and a man began arguing with her son. And when she intervened, he told her, ISIS, expletive, I will cut your throat. Go back to your country. This was this past Saturday in New York City. And although I've called her Miss El Sakari, we could also call her Officer El Sakari, who happened to have been an 11-year veteran of the New York Police Department. At a news conference this past Monday, Officer El Sakari, who not only is a member of the NYPD, is a decorated member of the NYPD who's been given accolades for saving victims from a burning building recently. At this news conference, she told the audience that I help everybody, no matter what your religion, what your faith. I'm here to protect you all. Unfortunately, this story is one of many incidents of hate crimes and discrimination that have occurred over the past year. The FBI recently released its 2015 hate crime statistics, and there were 257 incidents of anti-Muslim hate crimes, which was a 67% increase from the previous year. Now, the FBI's reporting statistics don't account for this incident against Officer El Sakari from this past weekend, nor does it account for any of the other recent incidents. And so when I heard of the topic of today's presentation, it made me think about an exhibit from the Harvard Law School. Harvard has an exhibit called Words of Justice, and it's a collaboration between students, faculty, and the law school. And the dean of the law school remarked that the words on these walls affirm the power and irrepressibility of the idea of justice. They give testimony to the endurance of humanity's yearning for fairness and dignity through the law. Now, Aisha actually gave you a preview of one of the quotes that's actually on this exhibit when she gave the quote from the Holy Quran, verse 135. That quote is actually one of the exhibits that's contained in the Harvard Law School exhibit on justice. And as Aisha mentioned earlier, part of it goes, "O you who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even as against yourself." This passage, along with the other quotes in this exhibit, represent the fact that justice, the quest for justice, and standing firm for justice is a universal message that has withstood the test of time. As Muslims, justice is a central component of Islamic teachings. We saw the importance of justice during the time that the Quran was revealed, when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, united the tribes of Arabia, demanded that women and girls be respected and protected, and required the just treatment of people of different faiths and tribes. For me, working on social justice issues meant pursuing a career as a civil rights attorney, where I could ensure that the laws and protections that this country affords to all people were available to even its most vulnerable, where I could use my skills in service to others, to do my part in service to humanity, to make sure that all people knew that the laws and protections that are established in this country are designed to protect us all. As we gather here today, it is important to stand firm for justice, whether that means tackling economic justice, discrimination, hate crimes, issues of mass incarceration, misogyny, racial justice, immigration, reform, the school-to-prison pipeline, poverty, and homelessness. At KARAMAH, that is one of the vital issues that we are dealing with, which is taking Islamic jurisprudence and making it accessible so that people understand these concepts from an Islamic perspective. When I worked at the Department of Justice, I litigated and investigated religious discrimination and religious accommodation cases involving Orthodox Jewish, Muslim, and Sikh men who wanted accommodations to wear beards in accordance with their faiths. I investigated cases involving Pentecostal Christians who were subjected to hostile work environments because of their faiths. And I litigated a case on behalf of a Muslim woman who wanted an accommodation to go on a religious pilgrimage to Mecca. You see, the issues that I investigated and litigated, they weren't Muslim issues, Christian issues, Jewish issues, or Sikh issues. They were human issues that involved a failure to provide people with justice. It was my role to ensure that all people were aware of and afforded the protections that the law provides. So today we are here standing firm for justice and calling on allies to assist in this quest for justice. This call to stand firm for justice is one that is important for us all, because when injustice affects one community, then all communities suffer. When a community is targeted because of their religion, their race, their citizenship status, their country of origin, or other protected bases, then all communities must stand firm for justice on their behalf. I'll close by giving a brief quote that Governor Cuomo stated in the wake of the recent hate crimes in New York. The governor stated that we do not allow intolerance or fear to divide us, because we know that diversity is our strength, and we are at our best when we stand united. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Hilary Shelton. I'm director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau and serve as Senior Vice President for Policy and Advocacy. I can't begin to tell you how proud I am to be here for a number of reasons that I can take such pride. Number one, I'm proud to be here because it's rare that you get a chance to have an audience that not only includes those of you who I've heard very much about, but also one of the most effective congressmen that has served in the U.S. House of Representatives in a very, very long time. You may not know that Andre Carson is one that has stepped into the position that he's in now, but the brother was trained upright. In essence, it is a slot that was perfected by his grandmother, and one that he has stepped in with such grace and dignity, has done such an extraordinary job in this position, cowering to none and advancing justice for all. Give Andre a big hand. It's also rare I get a chance to speak after anyone from the White House. Once they've said what they've said, it's all over and done anyway. But the sisters laid it out very loudly. I hope you'll join me in giving the sister also a big hand, please. That's great. And finally, I'm extremely proud and learned lessons of caution. And that is, you have to be careful how you treat everyone. Because even those you see as just the lowest of the low, even our interns can sometimes exceed us. And with that, let me just say, Aisha Rahman served as an intern for the NAACP Washington Bureau. I knew the sister was bad then, but I see her now, and I'm just so proud of her. Give her a huge hand for the leadership that she's provided all of us, including those. She's left us to higher heights. But when she calls, the answer is just yes. And then we figure out just how to do it. Sister, so good to see you. Wonderful as always. On behalf of the NAACP, the nation's oldest and largest grassroots-based civil rights organization, an organization that was formed in 1909 after actually race riots in Springfield, Illinois. As a matter of fact, it's an organization that always recognized the importance of diversity. Our founding members were not just African American, though there are some of you who would say they were. We had extraordinary African Americans among our leadership, but so many others from different races, different ethnicities, different religious groups. We've always appreciated the importance of diversity. The issue and challenge of our day then, 107 years ago, will be 108 years ago this February. But the challenges of us then, unfortunately, are the challenges of us now. But it brings me very clearly to a colloquial phrase that's used all the time now, as I also very proudly watch our young people actively engaged in focusing in on the issues of our day. Those who are part of Black Lives Matter or other groups, one of the phrases they've come to the conclusion they have to use is, it's not just about this moment, it's about the movement. A movement that has brought us such a long way over the 107 years of the NAACP, but so many other different organizations as well, Congressman. It's a movement that we recognize that the only way that we can continue to correct and address the promises of America is that we know that it is a day-to-day task. It is not a spectator sport. It requires all feet on the field and all moving forward consistently. Sometimes we lose track of how that works, and I think that my friend Mr. Obama is one that learned that sadly the hard way. He was one that broke all kinds of records as he was being elected the first African-American president of the United States, and we turned out in record numbers. As a matter of fact, more Americans, more African-Americans proportionally as well turned out in that 2008 election than any election prior to. In other words, America turned out in big ways to support him becoming that first president. But we forgot what we were doing. And 2 years later, we end up in a midterm election. And we realized, as we said at the NAACP, we went from a cause in which the President of the United States, Barack Obama, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, Hilary, and the first woman Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, were all lifetime members of the NAACP, and they were in charge. And with that, we moved the nation forward in a way we got so much done. As a matter of fact, there was a time, Congress, you may remember, we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with all the time we had left, because so much was being done and being done well. We saw the nation move to appoint its first African-American Attorney General, Eric Holder, someone that brought such grace, dignity, and understanding to that position, that was able to move to change things from within, but also from without as well. We're very proud of that. And it was only because we elected a Barack Obama that we could have an Eric Holder. But then we recognized that the Justice Department was the only place we were going to have to make sure the right people were in the right place at the right time to do the right thing. And as such, we had a vacancy on the Supreme Court. And I can't tell you how proud I was to see us reach to this Puerto Rican sister from New York, a sister named Sonia Sotomayor. And that she was then nominated by the president, and after a big fight, confirmed by the U.S. Senate. And the thing that made me very proud about that moment also is that when she went before the full Senate Judiciary Committee, when the hearings are being held and they were challenging her on whether she should be the one for the position, the question was asked, who has served on the U.S. Supreme Court that is your hero, someone that you see personifies the things you think are great about being a jurist on the Supreme Court? Who is it? And she pointed to the great Thurgood Marshall and said, that's my man. That's who I see myself being most like. So I couldn't have been prouder that someone from the NAACP, connected both directly and indirectly for the causes of justice, would now serve on that Supreme Court for life. Brothers and sisters, we did a great job moving things forward. But then as we moved on, we were able to pass things like the children's health insurance programs, adding 4 million children to the health care rolls. Almost 50% of those were African Americans. After George Bush had vetoed the bill, we didn't give up, we didn't give out, we didn't get in, and we provided health care for 4 million American children, and our president said, this is just a down payment. Y'all come back and see me. We're going to get the Affordable Care Act through as well, and we're going to finish filling that gap with 47 million Americans that had no health care insurance. We're going to get this done. And we got that first part of it done. Our children were then covered because we had a president before that we learned some hard lessons from as well. Sometimes, through our education process, we have to look at those that not only did well, but those who didn't. You can't ignore those that made the mistakes because we're not perfect. We just want to make sure we don't make those same mistakes as well. So my mom used to say, those who did not take care or pay attention to their history are destined to repeat it. She also said, however, those of us that, how did she put it? She said, some people say that I'm just a little paranoid for how I look at the challenges ahead of us. But just because I'm paranoid don't mean they're not out to get us. In other words, there are many lessons for us to understand through this process and whatnot as we move ahead. But that's why I'm so happy that you're here. I'm happy that you've been trained to understand how this process works, that you've been trained to continue to fight this fight to make sure that all America lives up to its promises, and that promises is also here in this library as well. It's the Constitution of the United States. So in essence, every fight we have, we recognize that everything works in basically 3 areas, or even 3 spheres, if I might. The 3 spheres that look very much like the Olympic spheres, not separate 3 spheres, areas, but 3 spheres that are connected at one point or another as we talk about what is social, what is political, and what is economic. So in essence, as we think about politics from its very base, politics, as I learned in Political Science 101, is the process, procedure, or method of determining who gets what, when, where, and under what circumstances. And that's why we came to understand that everyone must be involved in this fight, because it is a democratic fight for equal opportunity for all. The Constitution has made the promises, but our country has not lived up to those promises. So in essence, our fight is to make sure that indeed it does. You know, I think back on our history, and I think about that march that many of our predecessors participated in 1963. And though he was the last invited to the table, he was the one that expressed the understanding of what we were doing better than anyone else. I'm talking about the 1963 March on Washington. Most people don't realize, because he is always so well calculated as being part of that Dr. King wasn't even invited to speak until the night before. As the plans were being made, he wasn't part of that consideration. He didn't know what he was going to say, quite frankly, many would say, until it got up to that podium to open his mouth. And when he did, he was able to personify or have us understand why we were in Washington. And he said, and I'm going to do my best to repeat this. He said, we've come to Washington because our Constitution has issued us all that promise, very much like a promissory note or a check. One that was issued from the Bank of Morality and Justice. A check that says that every man and woman in this country will be treated equally. Equal opportunity under law, equal protection under the law as well. That's what it says, but we're here because as we move to the Bank of Justice to cash that check, it has come back stamped, insufficient funds. In essence, brothers and sisters, as we are here today, it's about us organizing ourselves to utilize that magnificent structure that when it does well, it does great. If it is ignored, it does not. In essence, our job is to make sure that we can move forward in our nation to get those things done that Constitution promises. That regardless of our race, our gender, our ethnicity, our point of national origin, or our religion, that indeed we must all be treated equally in this country with equal protection for all. So in essence, I think about how we've had to organize, because we came through a very strange immigration system. We came through that very peculiar immigration system called the transatlantic slave trade. Many of us are the descendants of those who were brought over for that reason, so we understand what it was like first to be recognized as being human beings. Because as you know, being brought over as chattel does not give you any rights of even humanity, much less citizenship in this country. As we moved through that process, we understood how the fight had to be there, and we were very delighted that we had a president that was willing to sign the Emancipation Proclamation saying slavery is illegal, no longer exists in this country, but it's not there. But what we needed was clarification of who we are, what our rights are, what the promises are to us as those who are also, in many cases, born or brought to this nation as we were. And with that, the Constitution had to be amended 3 times. The Reconstruction Amendments to the Constitution. Aisha, I know you studied this well in college. Law school will begin you in this process if you let it. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution guaranteed equal protection under law. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution defined what citizenship is and extended that to even those of former servitude. And the 50th Amendment to the Constitution gave us the tools that we needed to have this fight. That even as much as the Constitution prior to that, as it was crafted by the founding fathers, we can talk about the problems there as well. In essence, many things had to be clarified as I go to conclude here. The thing that had to be clarified is that you indeed have the right to cast an unfettered vote and for that vote to be counted. So with that, our struggle is always to make sure that we utilize that tool that's given to us. It has to begin with the vote and putting the right people in place, but it has continued to move forward, making sure that after we elect great people like Andre Carson and so many other friends of ours to serve well here in Washington, D.C., I want to ask you to take a look at this document that you have in the back. This is the NAACP's legislative report card. We, much like students get graded every time you turn around, we grade members of the Congress on how they vote on our bread and butter civil rights agenda. I hope you'll take a look at that, and if you want to just have fun and understand why I'm saying these things about Congressman Carson, turn to Indiana, and you'll see that this brother has got an A from the NAACP on civil rights for every minute that he's been in that Congress. You can give him another big hand for that. It's not always easy to do that. So I hope you do a couple things for me. I look forward to our questions. We have positions on many issues that go from everything that affects us as human beings and as citizens of this country. We know that even as much as the promises there, oftentimes the solution's not given to us. Oftentimes promises are broken or simply not fulfilled. Our job is to make sure they live up to those promises so we can all live as full first-class citizens in these United States of America. And let me just say that every ounce of training that you've got in this program, we're going to have to ask you to bring to bear. Everything and every commitment you've ever had to make sure that you, your children, and your children's children will be able to move beyond the reality that you're experiencing today is what we're going to have to fight for. We have to know we have the tools to fight, and we know there are oftentimes big distractions. Let me say this in my best nonpartisan way. The outcome of this last election is a big distraction. It's one that we're going to have to live with for the next 4 years, but it's a fight we're going to have. Don't think this is the worst it has been, because it's not. If you're looking for somebody to compare him to, look at Andrew Johnson and see how the deals that he cut and how he sold out our aspirations for us and our children and our children's children, for that matter, so that he can become president of the United States. Not the first time. I'm not trying to say anything but what I'm trying to say. But in essence, I'm going to take my seat and say, brothers and sisters, thank you, and welcome to the struggle.
Thank you, Mr. Shelton. Thank you, Ms. Abudlaleem. It's my great pleasure now to invite Congressman Andre Carson to the stage. And if you all would please start to write your questions on the cards and pass them to the right, we will immediately go into Q&A and discussion after Congressman speaks. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Aisha. I don't know how many times people saying another bad creation to you, but I want to thank you. I want to thank Raheemah for her hard work. I have to thank Dr. Hilary Shelton, who's a firefighter. He's a firebrand. He's a truth teller. He looks like Billy D. Williams, but he's more than that. He's an honorable man. He has a teacher's spirit. Far too often, we see leaders who are comfortable in their silos and they don't want to reach back. But what I have found in Dr. Shelton is that he is someone who has a coach's heart. He's always encouraging younger people to do more and to do better. You know, KARAMAH means a lot to me, especially to see the alliances that have been made with great organizations like the NAACP. And, you know, when I was 17, in my time when I was a young activist, it's easy to be a revolutionary when you don't have a mortgage, you know what I mean? But I was arrested at the age of 17 outside of a mosque. And at that time, I was too young to go to jail. So they sent me to the juvenile center. They sent the young man who was with me, who was, I think he was 19 at the time. So he was technically an adult. He went to jail. Now I'm older, I'm like 19, still a kid. But at that time, I wasn't allowed to, the juvenile center was not allowed to release juveniles on the weekend. But I was released. I looked outside, and I saw a sea of activists. There were Muslims. There were Christian pastors. There were youth organizers standing outside saying these young brothers didn't do anything wrong. There was a local NAACP who spoke up as well. Local Muslims who spoke up as well. I think when Dr. Shelton touched on the results of this election, that was a moment for us to reflect, pause, and think about our very critical future. Come January, the most racially diverse Congress in history will take office. Records of Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, and women of color from both parties will be serving in our next legislative session. So for our community to know this is to understand that the differences that are being celebrated in Congress in many ways are being condemned in public, and I find that empowering. When you look at a man like Donald Trump, who on one end is a great showman, he is a modern P.T. Barnum of sorts. He has had this objective to make America great again. But as we've seen in the past year or so, it looks like he's tried to make America hate again. And the fact that he has been dog whistling to racial supremacists or white supremacists and white nationalist groups, dog whistling to the point that he has people who are affiliated with these organizations in his cabinet, concerns me. It should concern you. The fact that there's even a conversation about creating a Muslim registry should concern all of us. Yes. But I'm comforted in knowing that KARAMAH is on the scene. I'm comforted in knowing that the NAACP is on the scene. I'm comforted in knowing that we have friends in our general assemblies, in our congresses, in our mayoral offices who will work together to make sure that Donald Trump is not the figurative bully in the lunchroom coming to take your and my lunch money. And so you should know, before I leave, because I have a hearing, that I am your friend, I am your brother, and as long as you have Aisha, Raheemah, and the great Hilary Shelton here at this panel, the future is certainly bright, and we must mobilize for 2018, and we certainly have to organize for 2020. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. God bless.
Thank you for those amazing remarks. Do we have any questions in the audience? I don't know if you guys have passed any down. I haven't. Oh, awesome. Okay. The first question for our panelists are, how do you think we can bring convergences between Muslim, Black, and other U.S. Folks to justice, to light in the mainstream American media at a time when Muslims and Black lives are especially under threat? Do you want me to repeat the question? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. How can we bring Muslim voices and Black voices to the forefront in the American media when those are the lives that are being threatened? And how do we bring these alliances about?
I mean, it's a challenging question because in many ways, Muslims and African Americans may not own the vehicles to disseminate this information. One thing that I always recommend is that for Muslims and African Americans who are given a platform through these different media vehicles to make sure that there is a diversity of perspectives that are present so that it's just not always, one voice. So that's one of the things I think that in Muslim communities and in the African American community we've been trying to do is to ensure that we're all working together so that there is a cohesive narrative that's put forth and to make sure that there's actually a diverse narrative that's also put forth. So I think working together internally and then taking that message to the external.
What's great about being on a panel like this is, in true Washington speak, I can associate myself to the comments of my colleague, as I strongly agree with everything she said. I would say add a couple of things in terms of how we implement. One of the challenges we have in our country sometimes is not truly understanding how things are for people who appear to be a little bit different. And we have little cultural differences and the like. And sharing those differences, I think, is one of the most amazing things that we can do. So in essence, I can tell you from my experiences, whether I was working on ending racial profiling and dealing with anti-racial discrimination policies or other issues, being able to demonstrate to those who don't live those experiences, those who don't have those concerns, those who are not as familiar with how life is on my side of the neighborhood, it's always important to share. It's also a wonderful thing to get to know each other. I'll give you some experiences. One of my earlier positions, I worked for the United Methodist Church in their government affairs office, just the other side of Capitol Hill. And on there, I met a very charismatic, in my opinion, imam by the name of Mahadi Bray. Mahadi sat down with us as we talked about how we work together in coalition to express how things worked in the Muslim communities and even the diversity therein. But of course, all Muslim communities are not alike either. Muslims come from every corner of the globe and have different experiences and some different cultures and subcultures. And that's important to understand as well. We talked about things like the death penalty as an issue that we're concerned about. The United Methodist Church opposes the death penalty, and NAACP opposes it. But there are those who promote that the Muslim community supports the death penalty all the way around. But here's what my friend Mahadi Bray told me. He said, Hilary, there are policies in the Quran that support the use of the death penalty. But the barrier is so high that no human being can reach it. In other words, there's no acceptable place that we can find in which a human being would be able to administer the death penalty in our society. As we know, there's no perfection. So in essence, there's no way that they can reach that high goal to be able to utilize it. As we talked, I found that there were so many things that we shared in common that as we discussed how we got to those points, we came to understand each other better, our communities better, and our culture better. And from that, I feel much more comfortable understanding that those things that I see on television too often, those images that are portrayed too often in motion pictures where for some reason or another, the Muslims seem to get the lion's share of being the bad guy. But it's rare that you see a Muslim in a position in motion pictures in which you are the good guy, the hero. In essence, I began to see the indoctrination that was being given in our direction that we had to overcome as well. So I say we have to demonstrate to each other how our communities work, share our cultures. As a matter of fact, one of the things I love sharing culturally is food. So let's share our food too. And I've had some delicious air cooking and delight. So let me stop there and just say that I think it's important that we find ways to share with each other, different communities, different ways, give each other a chance to see what's going on and understand why, even though we may use different names for it, in the final analysis, we're still aspiring to the same things in life.
While you still have the mic, Mr. Shelton, there's actually a question that builds on that. The question is, for peace building and justice, is it more practical to talk about the things that unite us, or should we really be talking about our differences and how to respect our differences?
I think you have to do both. I think in essence that understanding that how we're united makes a huge difference as well. And then how sometimes beginning there, when we talk about those things that are so often lifted up as differences, you see they're not big differences at all. The things that unite us, quite frankly, are oftentimes the goals we have for our families, our children, and our country. In essence, who does not want to live in a community that's safe of violence, that we're able to get the best quality education for our children? Who doesn't want to live in an area in which health care can be gotten when we need it, because doesn't everyone need health care from time to time? Who doesn't want to live in an area in which we can buy the homes that our hard work will get us and not be limited because of the color of our skin? The God's name that we utilize when we give Him praise are other differences. In essence, I think sharing those commonalities are crucial. But then talking about even where the differences are, as we begin to have trust and dig in that direction, we see those differences are a lot smaller than people realize. That those differences really are almost non-existent in many cases. And they may sound a little bit different, and maybe the colors may end up glowing a little bit differently as well. In essence, when we get down to the core of humanity and what we seek and what we want for our families and our children, we find they're very much the same.
I think Dr. Shelton hit the nail on the head. I think it comes down to humanity. I mean, just to share a small story with you all. I sat on a panel many years ago, and the woman who was on the panel with me was, sorry, that's okay. She was an Orthodox Jewish woman. And as she was talking on the panel, she started talking about a case that she was working on. And as she began talking about the case, I was like, that sounds like something that DOJ would be interested in looking into. And so after the panel, I got more information from her. And here she was, Orthodox Jewish woman, and here I am, Muslim woman. But what united us was that humanity. In that moment, we were talking about ensuring that her client, who was an Orthodox Jewish man, had an opportunity to join one of the nation's police forces. And he was at that time being denied that opportunity. And so for me, it wasn't about my faith or her faith. It was about us working together as humans to say, this person is being denied an opportunity for a job, and our laws should be protecting him in getting that employment. And so I think that's a huge issue of commonality that we had in that moment to actually work together to achieve a common good.
The next two questions are also related. The first is, African American boys are lacking role models. What do we do to help families who do not have a father figure, or how do we solve this problem for young black men? And then the second question is, how do we feel about the recent program that President Obama has initiated for young black men? And is there any hope for prison reform in the next 4 years?
I mean, in terms of role models, I think the program that the White House has started is a wonderful initiative for young men and boys of color. You know, each administration decides its priorities, and so I look forward to, you know, hopefully seeing that initiative continue, because I think it has a lot of good that can come through that program. And just to be clear, I'm actually here speaking today in my personal capacity and not as a representative of the administration. But I think so to segue from there, I think it's important that for us as representatives of nonprofits or individuals or community advocates to work together to find initiatives and to identify programs in our communities that we think can be advantageous, and to work to push government sometimes, but to also have things that we're doing locally to identify ways that we think we can be successful.
Now, I would want to first, I'll start with the back end question, work my way up. As we talk about the White House and the great work that they've done, President Obama deserves an incredible amount of appreciation for all of us. Our Brother's Keeper is a program that was set up to address issues and challenges of not just African American boys, but African American boys as well, but other boys in our society that are moving up and trying to do well in our society. I'm glad that you also framed the questions and continued through it in the area of those who don't have perhaps a male role model living in the house. You know, I grew up in a community, I'm of African descent. Both my parents grew up in Mississippi. And oftentimes there was this male adult that you referred to as uncle that had no blood relations at all. Uncle was a trusted male figure, an older male figure in our community, someone to our family and otherwise that was also there to provide that assistance and help. We've had boys being raised in families without fathers for a long time, regardless of what race or ethnicity or point of national origin, for that matter, what religion you may be. Unfortunately, that happens from time to time. But we've always stepped in as other men in society, understanding the role and responsibilities that we have to community as well. We have a responsibility to those communities, whether the boys have a father living in the home or don't. I have 3 sons. And I can tell you my job requires me to spend an awful lot of time on the road. I'm so delighted that there are other men in our family, other men in our community, whether it is our place of worship, whether it is places that we enjoy ourselves recreationally or otherwise. So they also have those examples. But I think many of us have also reached examples that aren't related to us at all. In the days of modern media, you can go on the internet and learn about, see, hear from the voices of and the expressions of just about any human being on the face of the earth. I've many times pulled up on my computer great speeches given by President Obama, or speeches given by others that are talking about issues, or even discussions on talk shows in which those that are various races and ethnicities are discussing issues that are important to us all. I think it is important that we see our role, all of our roles, that is, as being able to help wherever we may be. As the African proverb goes, it takes a family, it takes a community, it takes a village to raise an individual person. So in essence, we all have to participate in that village understanding of the world and the life around us.
Okay, I have a question for Raheemah. What are some tangible ways that we can work together what are some action items that we can have to bring about some of these issues of justice? For example, on issues of gender equity, on issues of racism, etc.
I think so.
Yeah, I'm sitting. Yeah.
I think some tangible things that we can do. An event like today is a great step. If you are a member or work on, come out to different KARAMAH events, to participate as a volunteer when we have events where we bring in community members, I think that sometimes can be a great first step, because what it does is if you don't have a familiarity with some of the principles of Islam, if you have questions about Islam, if you have questions about the gender equitable principles that are talked about in Islam, coming out to some of the events that KARAMAH may put on, I think engaging in that dialogue is something that's tangible that people can do. I think that sometimes is how relationships are built from there. So if you don't have a familiarity with the topics that we do, coming out to this type of event is a great starting point, because oftentimes it allows you to kind of expand your network and meet people who may be doing things or maybe parts of organizations that you're not familiar with. Speaking to Mr. Shelton or I afterwards to talk about, are there different programs that you all are working on? Are there different campaigns that we can join in on? What are some of the things that you have coming up in the next few weeks that we could be a part of? Whether it's lectures, whether it's speak-ins, teach-ins, things of that nature. Those are all small steps that can be very helpful in increasing this dialogue about moving forward and tackling issues of injustice and justice.
Great.
I would once again simply agree. What's great about being part of this organization, KARAMAH, is that you have a set of understandings of how things will work and kind of an ideology in which you'll be advancing many concerns around our communities. But we would also invite you to work with us at the NAACP, whether in coalition or as members. Many organizations work together. As a matter of fact, we are also the founders of one of probably the largest civil rights coalition in the United States and throughout the world, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. It's an organization, a coalition that includes not only traditional civil rights organizations like the NAACP, the National Urban League, but ventures into other organizations like the Japanese American Citizens League, the Organization of Chinese Americans, and so many, many other organizations that are members as well. So it's over 200 independent U.S.-based organizations that work together on issues we agree on. Because as I mentioned, the vision for the things we're trying to address are very much the same for all of us. If the issue is whether a school will allow you to come in and take advantage of the full set of resources the school is supposed to allow, but then say that, but you know what, you just look a little bit different. We want to help you sue the you-know-what out of them. If it is living in the neighborhood that you want to live in and whatnot, and finding that you're getting pushback because of the color of your skin, or they find out what your religious perspectives are, we would want to work with you in coalition to support that fight as well. As the saying goes, injustice to anyone is an injustice to everyone. We've learned too many lessons along the way. We saw what happened when the war broke out with Japan. They started rounding up those that appeared to be Japanese and putting them in prisons they called internment camps. We saw what happened after 9/11. It took anyone, they started following, spying on, intruding upon, in some cases even killing those that happened to look the way they thought that those who were flying the airplanes looked. In other words, we've learned a long time ago the bigots are not the brightest people. And being able to unify in our fight against them and recognize that we also share some similarities. And oftentimes it's based on how we look. Police officers will decide to pull us over. And somehow or another we're more suspicious because of the color of our skin. Well, they'll do that whether you appear to be Arab, Asian American, whether you appear to be African American, and the other differences as well, because they perceive us as looking different and somehow being different. We're ready to have those fights. And we want to have those fights. We need as many friends as we can get as we go, whether it's to Capitol Hill, to the state legislatures, or into our courtrooms, or even sitting in our communities to help our neighbors understand how we all want to live together and work together and be together. So in essence, all I'm saying, take a peep at another document I left you. This is the full legislative agenda for the NAACP. It includes our issues around health care and housing, education and employment, business ownership, and other issues that are crucial and important to our communities, and my guess is they're probably important to your communities as well.
And then one thing I wanted to add is that one of the things that we often see when it comes to issues of hate crimes and bullying is that there's oftentimes a vast amount of underreporting that goes on. And so by being here today, one of the things that you can do that's a tangible, takeaway is to talk to your neighbors and friends about these issues. And you'd be surprised at the number of people who say, I didn't know that was illegal, or I didn't know you couldn't do that. And so I'll also refer you to a lot of the websites, whether it's the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights website, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division website. These websites have great tools that are teaching tools and pamphlets that you can actually download. Because oftentimes I think in many communities, people are not reporting things that are hate crimes, that are issues of discrimination. There are laws that are available to protect all Americans, and it's important that people are aware of those. And so being here today and taking that message out to your friends and neighbors is something tangible that you can do.
Okay, there are two last questions. I want to be respectful of your time, but these are both really important. So I'm going to go ahead and ask both of them at the same time, and then ask the panelists to speak on them. The first is this. There has been recent concern about false news and how to control it. Does false information about Islam fall into the same category? How do we handle it when it causes violence against Muslims? Are there First Amendment exceptions? That's the first. And then the second is this. Based on the way we as children who are Muslims see the struggle and racism that goes on today, how do we help to try to make things better? Can we be a young activist? Should we react when we see something?
Okay. Good questions.
Go ahead.
Oh, great, thank you. Let me say that the false news is one of the importance. It's so good. It's one of the reasons it's so important for us to get to know each other in all our diversity that is the United States of America. There was a time in this country that we were so segregated by law that indeed there were white Americans that believed that African Americans had tails, and they had no way of knowing any different. In essence, the misunderstanding of the rumors that are put out there all the time. And all the stereotypes that we've heard so much about are also played very well into issues of false news and how we control it. We knew there were those who believed that if you were Latino, you were lazy. You want to take that siesta right around lunchtime and go to sleep and so forth. There are those who believe that you're African American, you're more prone to violence. There are those who believe that you're Arab American, that you're more prone to becoming a terrorist. All the stereotypes are still very much with us, and false news is a way of continuing that along. But we've seen this for a while. We saw what happened as we moved into social media, that those stories were able to be utilized and actually transferred to each other during utilizing another method of getting things out. Those who were part of hate groups and what they now call the alt-right were utilizing those tools to create a whole culture around racism, anti-Semitism, and other isms and schisms that are too much part of our society. So one of the best ways to address false news is to make sure we know the truth about each other and those differences. Let me also say this as a point of personal privilege. One of the reasons this question is coming up is because someone hearing false news about a presidential candidate somehow or another harboring children in the basement of a family pizza parlor here in Washington, D.C., believed that he somehow then had the authority to bring his assault weapon, his pistol, and other weapons into the city of Washington, D.C. and make an issue of it. Let me say that let's not also lose sight of some of the other issues. It is illegal to bring an assault weapon in Washington, D.C. It is stupid for someone to assume that a presidential candidate is somehow actually transferring children out of the basement of a family pizza parlor. I've been to the Common many times. The pizza's pretty good, by the way. It is outrageous for somehow or another for us to only look at the issue of false news, though we must look at that as well. But don't forget the point, the issue that this man felt that he could somehow come into the nation's capital, bringing a military-style assault weapon, to go in and shoot up a pizza parlor. Yes, he did pull the trigger several times. He needs to serve real time in prison. The message needs to be sent to others who might think there's an excuse to be able to come into my city, in this particular case, I'm going to claim it for me. I live here, I pay taxes here, I'm raising my children here, I'm educating them, and I plan on retiring here too, if everything goes well and God will provide. So in essence, I want to say that, but also in the question of Muslims, I can only say that I think there are many ways that Muslims can be very actively involved, and I've seen so many of them. Whether we're talking about KARAMAH, whether we're talking about American Muslim Council, whether we're talking about many other Muslim organizations that have consistently been very active on issues that are important to us, to not only address the issues of the reality of today, but for us to all to work to make sure we change the laws themselves. We change the accountability of people that actually adhere to those laws, and we make sure that we are protected equally like everyone else. We can do that, but it is going to require for us not to sit back as spectators, but to be actively involved in every step and every part of the process.
Okay, there's something about my voice that is so I'll just briefly mention the handling false news. I mean, one of the things, not to kind of beat a dead horse, but I think this type of event is very helpful in countering that false narrative. Because earlier this year, I had the opportunity, I live in a small town that's right outside of Washington, D.C. called Hyattsville. So for example, Hyattsville decided to have something called community conversations, and they would be on different topics. So they decided to have one about Muslim women. And they wanted to have it so that there would be Muslim women on a panel who could talk about issues related to Muslim women, and neighbors could come in and ask questions. And the goal was to really dispel a lot of misconceptions and myths and stereotypes about Muslim women. And excuse me, actually the panel was actually on Islam, but all the questions ended up being about Muslim women. And so it ended up being great that the panel was all Muslim women, because all the questions dealt with a lot of the misconceptions that the neighbors had about the role of women in Islam and how Islam treats women, and does Islam afford protections to women, and how does Islam treat women? And so to have 4 strong women on this panel, and I'm thinking like people like Aisha, like, how does Islam treat women? Have you met Aisha? Aisha's not a withering flower. I mean, so I think it's great to have those types of events, because it oftentimes helps in one setting. People can feel comfortable to ask these questions that maybe they don't know anybody, or they do know Muslims, but they just haven't been in this circumstance to feel comfortable to ask those questions. Why do you cover your hair? Why don't you cover your hair? Do you pray 5 times a day? I mean, there's no question in that kind of surrounding that's too small to answer or to ask. And oftentimes I feel like, we need more of those types of events, whether they be formal panels or just in-home gatherings where people can actually ask those questions and feel more comfortable. With respect to, can you be a young activist? Absolutely. We need people of all ages who are committed to issues of social justice and concern. You definitely don't want to do anything that's going to put you in harm's way, but there's a lot of things that you can do on a very informal level. You could even be an activist and speak to justice in your school. Often we've seen cases recently where there have been children as young as 5 years old that have been harassed by teachers. So, I mean, if you see something in your school that you feel is wrong, that is harassment, that is bullying, talk to a parent, talk to a trusted advisor. That's a method of activism, because basically what you're doing is you're speaking truth to instances of injustice. And that's what activists are doing. Activists are bringing injustice to light and working to change it. So no matter how young you are, you can be a part of that change.
Thank you all. I'm going to invite our Director of Civil Rights and Policy to close the event. Qasim Rashid.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. I want to start first by thanking our amazing panelists, Ms. Abudlaleem, Director Shelton, and of course the Honorable Andre Carson for making time for this today. That choice that they've made to share their wisdom with us is priceless. I want to thank each of you for being here as well, because the event is successful when we come together. We can speak to an empty room at home, but coming together and having this conversation is critically important. I'm going to close with a very short story, but I think it exemplifies what's been said here today. It's the story of a 4-year-old child who was given a very simple but very important task to herd some sheep. The owner of the sheep had to go somewhere and ask his 4-year-old child, "Tend to these sheep while I'm gone and protect them." Well, after the owner left, this 4-year-old child stood firm. He had a staff with him, and he stood and guarded these sheep. And before long, these 3 teenagers came and saw that these sheep were essentially unguarded. There was some small child guarding them, but they thought, this is our chance to get away by stealing these sheep, or by doing whatever we wanted to these sheep. That 4-year-old child saw these teenagers approaching and realized their intentions and stood between the sheep and these teenagers. And he put his arms up like this and said, "I am here to guard these sheep. I have given my word. You cannot pass. You cannot do any harm to these sheep." Now he was 4. These teenagers were 2-3 times his size and certainly outnumbered him 3-1. They could have harmed him, they could have done anything they wanted to him, and he would have been helpless, but he stayed firm in his convictions that I was given this responsibility, and justice dictates that I uphold my responsibility. You see, what it teaches us is that you don't need to have numbers to stand up for what's right. You don't need age to stand up for what's right. You don't need physical strength to stand up for what's right. You simply need the conviction and the courage to uphold to your commitment. That 4-year-old child was the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And that example that he set at such a young age permeated throughout his life and created a revolution that brought forth gender equity, racial equity, and religious equality. And to tie it back to our esteemed host at the Library of Congress, Sister Nuzit, that this is why he's regarded by many as the most influential person in history, because of how he exemplified justice not only in the spiritual realm, but also in the practical realm. With that, I thank you. I encourage you to continue to support our work at KARAMAH. You can go to our official website at karamah.org, find us on Twitter at KARAMAHDC, and on Facebook at KARAMAH. And we hope to continue this conversation going forward. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.